To genuinely understand the terror of medieval Europe, we have to look beyond the romanticized images of knights and castles, past the chivalry and the courtly love, and confront a stark, brutal reality. This was a time when justice, or what passed for it, was often a public spectacle, designed not just to punish the individual, but to instill profound, overwhelming fear in everyone who witnessed it. Imagine a world where the lines between law, cruelty, and public entertainment were blurred, where the slow, agonizing death of a human being was considered a legitimate deterrent, a warning etched into the very fabric of society. This wasn't about quick, clean endings. Medieval executions were often protracted, meticulously orchestrated, dramas of pain and suffering, designed to degrade, to dehumanize, and to maximize the torment before the final breath. The methods weren't just lethal, they were times torturous. They were engineered to break not only the body, but the spirit, to send a visceral message that rebellion, heresy, or even minor infractions would be met with an unthinkably grim end. It's a chilling thought how quickly we take our modern concepts of human rights and humane treatment for granted. Back then, there was no Geneva Convention, no appeals to inherent dignity. A condemned person was simply an example, a canvas upon which the state or the church could paint its power in the most horrifying colors. When we consider these forms of punishment, it's easy to dismiss them as relics of a barbarous past, something utterly alien to our sensibilities. But there's a deeper, more unsettling truth. These weren't random acts of sadism. They were often carefully chosen, legally sanctioned methods, each with its own twisted logic, its own symbolic weight, and its own unique way of ensuring that death was not a release, but a prolonged journey through unimaginable agony. They reflected a world grappling with immense social pressures, religious fervor, and a fundamental belief in the power of extreme public punishment to maintain order. To truly grasp the essence of medieval life, we must, however uncomfortably, confront these darkest aspects. And when we do, we quickly realize that very few of us, if any, would have survived the particular horrors of medieval justice, not just because they were lethal, but because they aimed to inflict suffering on a scale that today we can barely comprehend. Let's delve into 4 of these particularly gruesome methods, ones that stand out for their sheer brutality and the prolonged suffering they inflicted, demonstrating exactly why you wouldn't survive them in medieval Europe. The first, and perhaps most infamous, is the punishment of being hanged, drawn, and quartered. This was the ultimate fate for men convicted of high treason in Britain and Ireland, a crime considered the gravest offense against the state. It was a meticulously choreographed descent into hell, designed not just to kill, but to utterly obliterate a man's body, reputation, and legacy. The process began with the drawing. The condemned man was fastened by his feet to a hurdle, which was essentially a wooden panel or sledge, and then dragged behind a horse through the cobbled, often filthy streets to the place of execution. Imagine the humiliation, the sheer physical agony of being bounced and scraped over rough terrain, all while being pelted with refuse and insults from the gathered crowds. This initial journey alone could inflict severe injuries, sometimes even killing the victim before the main event. The intention here was clear: public degradation and a preview of the suffering to come, ensuring the condemned arrived battered, but crucially, still alive and conscious. Next came the hanging. Upon arrival at the gallows, the man was hanged by the neck. However, this wasn't typically a quick neck-breaking drop. Instead, it was often a short drop, designed to inflict slow strangulation, bringing the man to the very brink of death without actually crossing it. The executioner's skill was in cutting him down at precisely the right moment, ensuring he was still conscious, still able to feel the horrors that were yet to unfold. This interval of agonizing suspension served to prolong the suffering, allowing the victim to experience the terror of asphyxiation before being revived for the subsequent stages. Then came the drawing, in its more visceral sense, disembowelment. The victim, often barely conscious and certainly in immense pain, would be tied onto a flat surface. With a sharp knife, the executioner would cut open his abdomen, typically from below the chest down to the groin. While still alive, his intestines and other internal organs would be pulled out, often to be burned in a fire right before his eyes. The sensory horror of seeing and smelling one's own entrails consumed by flames while still feeling them torn from your body is almost beyond human comprehension. It was a calculated act of ultimate dehumanization, an attempt to utterly destroy the individual's physical integrity and spirit. Medieval chronicles even describe cases where the victim's genitals were removed and burned in front of them. Finally, the quartering. After the disembowelment, the still, warm, mutilated body would be beheaded and then literally divided into 4 separate parts. Sometimes this was done with an axe, other times by tying each limb to a different horse and spurring them in opposite directions. These pieces, along with the head, would then be parboiled and often displayed in prominent public locations across the country, like London Bridge, as a gruesome warning to any who might consider treason. The head might be bound with iron and set on a spear at the Tower of London. Sir William Wallace, the Scottish knight, suffered a similar fate in 1305. His head was set on London Bridge and his quarters sent to various cities. This final act of dismemberment and public display ensured that even in death, the condemned had no peace, and his fate served as a chilling, inescapable message to all. The intention was to terrorize and enforce absolute obedience to the crown. Next, let's turn our attention to the *** breaking wheel, ***, also known as the Catherine wheel, a truly horrifying device used for public execution across Europe from antiquity up to the 19th century. This method was designed for maximum pain and prolonged suffering, often reserved for aggravated murder or for highwaymen and street thieves. The condemned person was taken to a public scaffold and tied to a large wooden spoked wheel, often similar to a wagon wheel, sometimes with an iron rim. In some variations, the victim was spread-eagled, with their limbs extended along the spokes. The executioner would then systematically begin to break their bones with a heavy hammer or an iron bar. This was not a quick series of blows. The number and sequence of strikes were often specified in the court sentence. The process typically started with the legs, then moved to the arms, shattering the bones one by one. The goal was to inflict immense pain and break every major bone without immediately causing death. There are accounts of victims being struck repeatedly for hours, their bones crushed and splintered, suffering severe bruising, internal injuries, and organ damage. The sounds of bone against iron, the screams, the sheer agony, all played out before a captivated, terrified audience. The executioner's skill was in keeping the person alive through this brutal ordeal. After their limbs were shattered, the broken body of the victim would sometimes be woven through the spokes of the wheel, ensuring maximum exposure and humiliation. This could last for hours, sometimes even days, with the mangled person left to die slowly from shock, dehydration, or blood loss. In some particularly cruel instances, the wheel, with the still living victim attached, would be hoisted onto a pole or scaffold for public display, a grim, revolving crucifix of suffering. The wheel could also be turned over a fire or pushed down a rocky hillside, adding further torment. In some German regions, it was custom to place underlays of wood beneath the victim's joints to ensure clean breaks with each blow. The serial killer Peter Neers in 1581, for instance, received 42 strikes with the wheel before being quartered alive. The breaking wheel was a stark symbol of ruthless justice, a testament to a society that believed in the power of public, protracted torment to enforce its laws. Our third form of execution is ***, burning at the stake ***. This method was a common punishment throughout Europe, particularly from the 11th to the 18th centuries, and was most often reserved for crimes considered an offense against religion or morality, such as heresy, blasphemy, witchcraft, or even high treason for women. It was a punishment deeply rooted in symbolic purification, the belief that fire could cleanse the soul or utterly destroy the evil within a person. The condemned would be tied to a large wooden stake, often surrounded by a pile of faggots or firewood. The intention was to burn them alive, a horrifying death that could last for a considerable time. The fire was typically lit at the feet, meaning the victim would often slowly burn from the extremities upwards. Imagine the searing pain, the unbearable heat, the smoke filling the lungs, all while the crowd watched. Death was not instantaneous. It was a drawn-out, agonizing ordeal. Victims would scream, writhe, and often pass out from shock before eventually succumbing to the flames or smoke inhalation. Historical accounts detail the immense suffering. Joan of Arc, famously burned at the stake in 1431, is one of the most well-known examples. The severity of the punishment meant that sometimes, out of a twisted sense of mercy, executioners would place gunpowder in the wood or use a noose, often a chain, to try and shorten the victim's suffering, ensuring a quicker death by explosion or strangulation before the fire fully consumed them. However, this was not always the case, and many suffered the full, prolonged horror. Burning at the stake was a highly theatrical event, a public display of the church or state's power to condemn and annihilate those who defied its doctrines or laws. It wasn't just physical torment, it was psychological warfare waged against the populace. The sight, the smell, the screams, all served as a terrifying reminder of the consequences of straying from established norms. In England, while men for treason were hanged, drawn, and quartered, women for the same crime, or for witchcraft, were often burned at the stake. This was partly due to concerns about public decency if women were subjected to disembowelment. The practice became particularly common during the witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries, where the accused, mostly women, were subjected to this fiery end. This form of execution, with its profound symbolism and horrific reality, represents one of the most brutal punishments of medieval Europe. Finally, let's explore impalement, a method of execution that became synonymous with terror, particularly through figures like Vlad the Impaler. While often associated with Eastern Europe, impalement was known and used across various cultures and periods. A truly ancient and brutal form of capital punishment reserved for crimes against the state, traitors, or during wartime to suppress rebellions. The core concept of impalement involves penetrating a human body with a stake, pole, or spear, often by complete or partial perforation of the torso. The methods varied, but the objective was always maximum, prolonged suffering. One common technique involved forcing the victim to sit on a sharpened wooden stake driven into the ground. The stake would then be slowly, carefully, and agonizingly pushed upwards through the body, often entering through the anus. The executioners, skilled in their gruesome craft, would often maneuver the stake to avoid vital organs, ensuring the victim remained conscious for as long as possible, sometimes for hours or even days. Imagine the profound, inescapable pain as a wooden stake slowly rips through your internal tissues, your body weight gradually driving it deeper. As the stake ascended, it could emerge through the back, the shoulder, or even the neck, leaving the impaled person to slowly die from blood loss, infection, shock, or dehydration. The sight of multiple impaled bodies, often lining roads or battlefields, was a terrifying psychological weapon. Vlad the Impaler, the 15th century ruler of Wallachia, famously used this method on a massive scale against his enemies, including Ottoman soldiers and even his own people, to enforce his will. He created literal forests of the impaled, with thousands of bodies skewered on stakes, a sight so horrific it reportedly turned back the mighty Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II's invading army. This was not merely execution. It was a theatrical display of absolute power and cruelty, designed to instill fear so profound that resistance became unthinkable. While some medieval torture devices like the Iron Maiden are now largely considered myths or later sensationalist fabrications, the methods of hanged, drawn, and quartered, the breaking wheel, burning at the stake, and impalement were undeniably real and horrific facets of medieval justice. They stand as grim reminders of a past where life was cheap, and the line between punishment and unimaginable cruelty was not just blurred, but often intentionally erased. These were not deaths you could simply survive. They were designed to ensure that the journey to the grave was as agonizing and protracted as humanly possible, leaving no doubt about the absolute power of those who wielded such terrifying instruments of justice.